December 1944. A cold gray dawn drapes the Ardennes in mist. The forest is quiet, almost unnervingly so, broken only by the distant rumble of engines and the crunch of frost under heavy boots. On a ridge, a small German Panther crew peers through frost-lined vision slits, their breath fogging in the bitter air. The radio crackles. Reports are scattered, confused. Then, through the veil of morning haze, they see them. Hundreds of Sherman tanks, rolling steadily like an armored river across the snow-covered valley below. The Germans had expected ambushes, smaller units, perhaps a fight of equals, but nothing like this. The rumble grows louder, the ground trembling beneath the sheer mass of steel. For a moment, time seems suspended. Eyes widen, fingers tighten on triggers. The men understand instantly. They are outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered, not by skill, but by numbers. 10 Shermans for every Panther. The horizon is alive with American tanks, relentless, unstoppable, and the Ardennes will soon bear witness to a clash that no tactical skill alone could withstand. The ridge trembles beneath the approaching storm, and a new chapter of armored warfare begins. December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes forest, straddling Belgium and Luxembourg, was cloaked in winter's chill. Snow blanketed the winding roads and dense conifers, turning the rugged terrain into a silent labyrinth. For months the Allies had been pressing eastward. The Third Reich was stretched thin, yet Adolf Hitler believed a bold, decisive strike could split the American and British forces and turn the tide on the Western Front. Operation Wacht am Rhein, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, was meticulously planned. German forces concentrated nearly 200,000 men, including elite panzer divisions, around the Ardennes. The objective was audacious: punch through the lightly defended sector, seize the Meuse River, and capture Antwerp, severing Allied supply lines. Speed was essential. Surprise was mandatory. Any delay would doom the offensive. On the American side, the Ardennes had been considered a quiet sector. Generals Patton and Eisenhower had kept the bulk of armored forces in France and Luxembourg, preparing for winter offensives further east. Many units stationed in the Ardennes were inexperienced, comprising recently drafted soldiers and replacements. Tank strength was limited. Commanders relied heavily on reports from reconnaissance patrols, yet the dense forest and narrow roads made accurate intelligence difficult. German panzer divisions, including the 1st SS Panzer Division and 2nd Panzer Division, were well equipped with Panthers, Tigers, and older Panzer IVs. The Panther tank, armed with an 75mm QK-42L70 gun, was among the most formidable armored vehicles of the war. Its sloped armor could deflect most Allied shells at medium range, and the crew of 5 had trained rigorously for tank warfare. Combined with mechanized infantry and artillery support, German units could, in theory, punch through lightly defended sectors. Yet the Americans possessed a different advantage, less obvious on paper. The Sherman tank, though less armored and armed than the Panther, was mechanically reliable, easy to produce in massive quantities, and supported by unprecedented logistical capabilities. The U.S. industrial machine produced thousands of Shermans, each standardized for repairs and resupply. Fuel, ammunition, and spare parts moved along meticulously organized supply lines. The Germans, despite skill and technology, were limited by fuel shortages and stretched supply chains. As dawn approached on December 16th, German units advanced along forested routes, encountering sporadic resistance. American infantry units, though poorly prepared for a concentrated assault, engaged with anti-tank guns and artillery where possible. Reports filtered back to division command. Movement was slow, resistance limited, but the forest created delays that could jeopardize the timetable. Strategically, the Germans relied on shock and momentum. Each Panther and Tiger would strike where American defenses were weakest. Commanders assumed that the sheer technological superiority of their tanks, combined with tactical expertise, would allow smaller units to overcome larger enemy formations. They did not anticipate the scale of American reinforcements and the sheer number of Sherman tanks positioned behind the lines, ready to counterattack. In the weeks leading up to the offensive, the U.S. Army had begun concentrating armored units in France and Luxembourg in anticipation of German moves. The 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions, equipped primarily with Shermans, were positioned for rapid deployment. Unlike the German reliance on elite crews in a limited sector, the Americans relied on mass and maneuver. If numerical superiority could be brought to bear, even the most advanced German tanks could be overwhelmed. By the evening of December 16th, the Ardennes had become a battlefield of extremes. Elite German panzers moving through forests under cover of darkness, and American supply convoys preparing to deploy tanks by dawn. Terrain, weather, and the logistical calculus of both sides set the stage for an encounter that would define armored warfare. The tension between quality and quantity, between elite training and industrial might, framed the conflict. When the first large American armored units arrived, German crews would soon realize that even the most sophisticated Panther could be rendered vulnerable, not by skill, but by sheer numbers. The stage was set for a confrontation in which the Ardennes forest, silent and snow-covered, would witness the collision of two very different approaches to war. December 17th, 1944. Dawn broke over the Ardennes, pale sunlight filtering through snow-laden pines. The German offensive had begun the night before, yet American forces were still scrambling to organize a coherent defense. Roads were clogged with refugees, damaged vehicles, and the remnants of units forced back by the initial German advance. Visibility was limited. Commanders struggled to reconcile reports from scattered infantry outposts with the movement of mechanized German units. By mid-morning, small engagements revealed a stark contrast in operational philosophy. German Panther and Tiger tanks moved deliberately, coordinating with infantry and artillery, seeking to punch through specific weak points. Their crews were disciplined, confident, and well-trained. Each vehicle was a mobile fortress, capable of engaging multiple targets at distances beyond the effective range of most American anti-tank weapons. The Americans, meanwhile, began mobilizing in response. The 2nd Armored Division, the Hell on Wheels, and elements of the 3rd Armored Division were dispatched toward the Ardennes. They moved in long convoys over narrow, snow-packed roads, often under artillery harassment and aerial observation by German reconnaissance. Unlike the German tanks, Shermans lacked heavy frontal armor and long-range guns capable of easily piercing Panther and Tiger defenses. Yet their advantage lay in numbers, coordination, and adaptability. By late morning, American commanders implemented a key tactical principle: concentration of force. Rather than engaging enemy tanks piecemeal, Shermans were grouped into battalions and sent to locations where German advances were concentrated. This allowed multiple tanks to focus fire on a single target, overwhelming the protection of even the most formidable Panther or Tiger. The U.S. approach relied on redundancy, maneuver, and aggressive coordination between tank, infantry, and artillery units. The German assumption of tactical superiority began to clash with reality. Reports from German officers indicated disbelief at the sheer number of Shermans appearing on the battlefield. Where a Panther or Tiger might face 2 or 3 Shermans in earlier skirmishes, entire battalions, sometimes numbering 10 or 15 tanks, engaged simultaneously. The Germans had expected a slower, more isolated response. Instead, they were met with overwhelming numbers that challenged the best-trained crews. Weather compounded the situation. Snow and ice hindered German mobility, particularly for heavier Tiger tanks prone to mechanical breakdowns. Roads clogged with wreckage and stalled vehicles slowed advances, allowing American armor to set ambushes and defensive positions. Shermans, lighter and more mechanically reliable, could navigate difficult terrain more effectively, reinforcing the idea that quantity, supported by logistics, could negate individual technical superiority. Communication played a decisive role. U.S. forces had established reliable radio networks linking tank units with infantry, artillery, and headquarters. Orders could be relayed quickly, allowing armored units to adjust formations, flank German positions, or withdraw under fire. German units, reliant on pre-planned coordination and constrained by radio security protocols, often found themselves isolated, facing concentrated fire from multiple directions. By late afternoon, first major clashes demonstrated the emerging pattern. Shermans, firing in coordinated volleys, struck Panther tanks from angles designed to exploit weaker side and rear armor. Artillery fire, guided by forward observers, saturated known German positions, further limiting maneuver. German crews reported confusion and shock. Tanks that should have dominated the battlefield were being destroyed at alarming rates, not due to individual error, but because they were outnumbered 10-1. Across the Ardennes, this pattern repeated. Where German panzers had expected to sweep unchallenged, they encountered lines of American armor, artillery support, and infantry armed with anti-tank weapons. Each engagement revealed a fundamental truth of modern armored warfare. Superior technology could be countered by coordination, numbers, and logistical depth. The Americans were demonstrating a form of warfare that emphasized adaptability, redundancy, and industrial power over elite individual performance. By nightfall on December 17th, the Ardennes was littered with wrecked vehicles, spent shells, and frozen soldiers. German units were exhausted, their initial momentum faltering under a constant, overwhelming barrage of American tanks and supporting forces. The stage was set for the full realization of American armored superiority, not through superior individual machines, but through mass, mobility, and coordination that German crews had scarcely imagined possible. The German officers' disbelief, fueled by the relentless appearance of Sherman after Sherman, would become a recurring theme throughout the battle. Their initial assumption that quality and training alone could secure victory was being challenged by the sheer scale and efficiency of U.S. armored forces. This moment would foreshadow the decisive role of American tank battalions in the Ardennes and set the tone for armored engagements across the Western Front. For German tank crews, the shock was immediate and visceral. Trained to rely on precision, discipline, and technical superiority, they were suddenly confronted with an unrelenting flood of American Shermans. The psychological impact was profound. Crews reported feelings of disbelief as waves of medium tanks emerged from wooded ravines and snow-covered hillsides, often firing from multiple directions simultaneously. Veteran Panthers and Tigers, designed to dominate smaller engagements, were now vulnerable simply due to being outnumbered. American crews, in contrast, exhibited a mixture of cautious professionalism and dogged resolve. Many were young men, some barely 20, operating machinery that lacked the reputation for invincibility enjoyed by their German counterparts. Yet the confidence instilled by rigorous training, combined with overwhelming numerical superiority, created a unique morale advantage. Every tank that survived an engagement reinforced the notion that American coordination and persistence could offset technical limitations. The Ardennes engagements highlighted a crucial difference in doctrine. German armored strategy emphasized breakthrough operations, small formations striking decisively at weak points, often relying on ambush and superior gunnery. Shermans, by contrast, employed combined arms tactics. Tanks advanced in coordinated lines, supported by artillery barrages and infantry screening for anti-tank threats. Numerical superiority allowed them to envelop German positions, creating kill zones where Panther and Tiger crews faced multiple simultaneous targets. Ambushes, once a German specialty, were neutralized by careful reconnaissance and flexible deployment. Even when terrain favored the defenders, American forces could rotate units in and out of the line, maintaining pressure while mitigating losses. Tactical flexibility, rather than individual machine quality, emerged as the decisive factor. Technically, the Sherman was no match for a Panther or Tiger in a head-to-head duel. The Panther's long 70mm gun could pierce Sherman armor at ranges exceeding a mile, while the Tiger's 80mm cannon could destroy most Allied vehicles almost effortlessly. Yet, technological superiority did not guarantee battlefield dominance. Shermans were mechanically reliable, easier to repair, and could be produced in staggering numbers. The standardization of parts and the industrial output of American factories meant that losses could be replaced quickly, keeping units operational. Furthermore, U.S. crews used tactics to mitigate weaknesses. Angled armor, coordinated volleys, and flanking maneuvers allowed them to exploit weaker side and rear armor of German tanks. Command decisions played a critical role in these encounters. American officers emphasized decentralized command, allowing tank commanders at the front to make split-second decisions based on local conditions. This contrasts sharply with German doctrine, where centralized planning and strict adherence to operational orders often slowed responses. In the Ardennes, this leadership model allowed Shermans to concentrate firepower effectively, respond to flanking maneuvers, and withdraw under pressure without waiting for orders from distant headquarters. The combination of tactical freedom and disciplined coordination created a battlefield environment where numbers amplified effectiveness, not chaos. From the German point of view, the sheer volume of Shermans was staggering. Reports from Panther and Tiger crews often described fields of metal stretching beyond sight, with repeated waves of medium tanks overwhelming defensive positions. Unlike previous encounters, where a single German tank could dominate a sector, here each engagement became a battle of attrition. German commanders struggled to adapt. Anti-tank tactics that had worked earlier, concealed positions, ambushes, and concentrated artillery, were less effective when Shermans arrived in overwhelming numbers. Even experienced crews found themselves forced to retreat, not due to inferiority of weapons, but because there were simply too many adversaries to counter. Morale among German units began to falter, eroding the psychological advantage they had maintained in prior campaigns. The numerical imbalance created a subtle but decisive moral shift. German troops, trained to respect technical superiority, were unnerved by repeated encounters with what they perceived as inferior tanks. Soldiers began to internalize the idea that no matter how well they fought, the Americans could simply replace losses faster. Fear of encirclement and the inevitability of being overwhelmed seeped into every decision, influencing both strategic planning and frontline reactions. On the American side, the constant advance of overwhelming numbers reinforced a sense of invincibility. Even when individual Shermans were destroyed, crews saw replacements arriving quickly. The knowledge that they were part of a massive, well-coordinated machine encouraged bold maneuvers, confident fire, and a relentless push that compounded German anxiety. This psychological edge was subtle, yet it would prove decisive in engagements throughout late 1944. Logistics was the invisible backbone of this advantage. American industrial capacity meant that Shermans could be produced at a rate impossible for the Germans to match. By late 1944, U.S. factories were turning out over 2,000 Shermans per month. Replacement parts, fuel, and ammunition were delivered with precision to keep units operational even in the thick of battle. German forces, on the other hand, faced shortages on multiple fronts. Fuel scarcity, difficulty in transporting heavy tanks, and delayed reinforcements limited the ability to mass firepower. Even the finest Panther or Tiger could not compensate for a lack of ammunition or a stalled supply line. The Americans' logistical efficiency turned numerical advantage into a practical battlefield dominance, allowing relentless pressure that German units could not absorb indefinitely. When human, tactical, technological, leadership, enemy perception, moral, and logistical factors are combined, The reason for American dominance becomes clear. The Sherman's relative simplicity and ease of production, coupled with doctrinal flexibility, coordination, and sheer numbers, transformed what could have been a technical disadvantage into a strategic advantage. German crews, stunned and often demoralized, faced a reality where no single tank could dictate the outcome. By understanding these angles together, we see why the Ardennes and similar engagements became tests not of individual weapon quality, but of scale, coordination, and resilience. The Sherman, once underestimated, emerged as a symbol of industrialized warfare, where numbers, tactics, and human ingenuity outweighed raw firepower. The buildup of these factors set the stage for a turning point, where the numerical, tactical, and psychological dominance of American forces would decisively shift the momentum of the battlefield. December 16, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. A cold, dense fog settled over the rolling hills. Pine trees shivered under a biting wind, and the narrow roads became slick with ice and mud. German tanks, Panthers, Tigers, and a scattering of Panzer rifles lined the flanks of the forest roads, prepared for a rapid, decisive thrust into Allied lines. Commanders expected confusion, speed, and local superiority to break the American defenses, but the Americans had anticipated something else. Sherman tanks, in numbers the Germans could scarcely comprehend, waited in concealed positions supported by infantry, artillery, and engineers. Radio chatter crackled with orders. Coordinate, hold, report. Despite their medium armor, the Shermans moved with purpose, exploiting their numerical advantage. The first wave of German armor advanced along the main road. Tigers fired from long range, aiming for the lead Shermans. Explosions punctuated the fog. Yet, for every Sherman destroyed, 2 more appeared from hidden flanks and parallel routes. American gunners adjusted their aim quickly, firing coordinated volleys that disrupted German formations. Panthers tried to outflank, but American units shifted seamlessly, creating interlocking fields of fire. By late morning, a pattern emerged. German crews realized that shooting one Sherman did not change the outcome. The forests and hills seemed to funnel them toward waiting firepower, a living trap reinforced by numbers. German officers signaled retreats, only to be countermanded by higher commands that underestimated the scale of American reinforcements. One striking incident occurred near the village of Bühlingen. A platoon of 5 Tigers engaged what they believed were 10 Shermans. Within minutes, American numbers swelled. Hidden Shermans emerged from secondary roads and wooded flanks. The Tigers, formidable in isolation, were encircled, their crew morale crumbling. By afternoon, all 5 had been disabled or abandoned. German reports later described a forest filled with metal ghosts, moving in waves, unstoppable. Artillery support amplified the effect. U.S. field guns, positioned miles behind the lines, lobbed shells with precise timing. German counter-battery fire was sporadic and often misdirected, hampered by the fog and disrupted communications. The relentless bombardment forced German units to disperse, leaving isolated tanks vulnerable to concentrated Sherman attacks. Meanwhile, American leadership maintained strict discipline. Commanders coordinated units in real time, exploiting intelligence and terrain. The Sherman's mobility allowed rapid repositioning, preventing German tanks from establishing kill zones. Every tactical maneuver reinforced a larger strategy. Numerical superiority applied in a coordinated, flexible formation. By nightfall, the German offensive had stalled. Roads were littered with abandoned tanks, destroyed vehicles, and immobilized artillery. Sherman numbers had overwhelmed not through technical supremacy, but through sheer scale, coordination, and resilience. German soldiers, exhausted and demoralized, recognized for the first time that numerical dominance could dictate the battlefield. Regardless of individual tank quality, the stage was now set for the next day. when the Americans would exploit this breakthrough, turning the tide in the Ardennes and proving that production, logistics, and tactical flexibility could overcome even the most feared armored vehicles of the Wehrmacht. December 17, 1944. The Ardennes forest. Belgium dawn broke over a frozen landscape. Snow blanketed the roads, turning mud into treacherous ice. German commanders, stubbornly clinging to orders from high command, pushed forward with what remained of their armored spearheads. Their initial shock had given way to frustration. For every Tiger or Panther they deployed, Shermans seemed to multiply, appearing from unseen paths, hidden ravines, and forested flanks. By mid-morning, the true scale of American coordination became terrifyingly clear to German officers. Artillery fire, previously sporadic, now struck with clockwork precision. American forward observers relayed coordinates with unparalleled speed. A Sherman platoon, moving in loose, adaptive formations, could draw enemy fire, reveal positions, and then vanish, leaving German crews exposed to both tank and artillery fire. Near the crossroads of Stavelot, an entire German company attempted to seize a key bridge. Tigers led the charge, Panzer IVs followed. But the Americans had anticipated this move. Hidden Shermans emerged from wooded ridges on either side. Their 75mm guns found weak spots in flanks and rear armor. Artillery thundered from concealed positions, shells landing with deadly accuracy. German tanks were cut off, forced into defensive huddles in open snowfields. By noon, only a fraction remained operational. Individual accounts from the German side describe a surreal battlefield. One officer wrote, "The Shermans moved in a tide, appearing where none should be. We fired, and still they came. It was not skill or bravery, it was an unending flood." Tanks that had dominated other fronts now faced overwhelming numbers. Crew morale fractured as officers realized that mechanical superiority could not compensate for being outnumbered 10-1. Meanwhile, American infantry and engineers capitalized on every immobilized vehicle. They cleared obstacles, repaired roads, and constructed field fortifications, enabling Shermans to advance continuously. Supply lines, previously a potential vulnerability, were fortified with trucks, fuel depots, and ammunition dumps, ensuring the relentless momentum of Sherman units. By late afternoon, German armor was in full retreat. Tigers and Panthers, symbols of armored supremacy, were abandoned in the snow. Some crews attempted to destroy their vehicles to prevent capture, but American engineers recovered many, documenting and studying the designs. The battlefield itself became a testament to logistical dominance and tactical foresight. The psychological impact on German soldiers cannot be overstated. Accounts describe a mixture of disbelief and resignation. Experienced tankers, trained to respect German engineering as unmatched, now faced the reality that they could be outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and systematically destroyed by a medium tank. The Ardennes had exposed the limits of reliance on individual vehicle performance without sufficient numbers or coordinated support. By nightfall, the Americans controlled key routes, bridges, and towns, consolidating their gains. Sherman tanks, despite thinner armor and lighter guns compared to German heavy tanks, had demonstrated the decisive value of quantity, coordination, and adaptability. The German offensive, meant to split Allied lines and seize Antwerp, had stalled irreparably. The battlefield, littered with wrecks and frozen bodies, told a story of strategy triumphing over engineering prestige. The lesson was clear. In modern mechanized warfare, numbers, supply, and tactical flexibility could outweigh superior firepower. The Ardennes would be remembered not for individual tank duels, but for the overwhelming tide of American armor that German crews could neither predict nor counter. This turning point did not merely halt the German advance, it shifted the strategic initiative firmly into Allied hands. The next phase would see American forces press forward, exploiting the disarray, consolidating liberated territories, and proving that industrial might, applied with tactical ingenuity, could dictate outcomes on a scale previously unimagined by even the most seasoned German commanders. December 18, 1944. The frozen roads and shattered forests of the Ardennes bore witness to a battle that would reshape German calculations on armored warfare. The immediate aftermath of the Shermans' overwhelming numbers was evident in both the physical and psychological toll on German forces. Entire panzer units had been neutralized, their tanks abandoned or destroyed, while American losses were comparatively lighter. Thanks to superior coordination and combined arms support, estimates indicate that in just 3 days of concentrated fighting, German forces lost more than 400 tanks and assault guns in the Ardennes, including Tigers, Panthers, and Panzerweifus. American units, by contrast, suffered roughly 130 Sherman losses, many recoverable or repairable within days. The disparity in numbers was staggering. German officers, trained to prize mechanical superiority, confronted an uncomfortable truth. Sheer engineering excellence could not compensate for being outnumbered 10-1. Beyond the material losses, morale among German tank crews plummeted. Reports from captured soldiers describe a sense of futility. Trained crews, once confident in their armored might, now faced a relentless tide of medium tanks that could strike, withdraw, and reappear with terrifying consistency. Many recounted moments of disbelief when Sherman seemed to appear from impossible angles, hitting positions thought secure. Officers worried that the myth of German armored invincibility had been shattered. For the Americans, the victory reinforced doctrines developed over years of training and mechanized warfare experimentation. Forward observers, engineers, infantry, and armor had operated as a single organism. Bridges were secured and repaired, supply lines extended, and artillery integrated seamlessly with tank movements. Sherman crews, though operating under lighter armor and armament than their German counterparts, demonstrated the effectiveness of coordination and combined firepower. The lessons learned here would echo across subsequent operations, from the Rhineland to the heart of Germany. The battle also had broader strategic implications. Hitler's Ardennes offensive, intended to sever Allied supply lines and seize Antwerp, was irrevocably stalled. Allied forces regained the initiative, pushing German forces back toward their own borders. By late December, the Germans had lost not only men and materiel, but also the psychological advantage they had clung to since the early Blitzkrieg campaigns. The Ardennes proved that the U.S. industrial and tactical approach, producing large numbers of reliable, versatile vehicles, could overcome even the most formidable enemy armor. Intelligence assessments circulated among German high command following the battle highlighted a grim reality. Reports noted that American logistical efficiency, tactical innovation, and numerical superiority in armored units allowed for sustained operations that German forces could not match. Memoirs from German engineers and officers stressed surprise and frustration. Many had never anticipated that medium tanks, often considered inferior, could dominate when deployed en masse with supporting elements. The battlefield itself remained a testament to industrial scale and ingenuity. Sherman tanks, despite thinner armor, had leveraged mobility, adaptability, and massed firepower to outmaneuver and destroy heavier German tanks. Artillery coordination magnified their effectiveness. Engineers recovered abandoned German vehicles, analyzing their designs. But the strategic lesson was clear. Superiority in quality was insufficient without matching quantity, support, and battlefield integration. By the close of December 1944, the Ardennes counteroffensive had concluded in the Americans' favor. German forces, retreating in disarray, faced dwindling supplies, frozen terrain, and the psychological weight of failed objectives. Allied forces, emboldened by their success, prepared to press forward into Germany with renewed confidence. The stage was set for the final phases of the European conflict, where lessons from the Ardennes would inform every maneuver, every tank deployment, and every strategic decision. The consequences of this armored clash extended beyond immediate losses. German commanders began re-evaluating the deployment of heavy tanks, the reliance on small unit prestige, and the role of tactical mobility versus mechanical superiority. The Ardennes had shown them, starkly, that industrial output, combined with ingenuity and coordination, could decisively shape the battlefield. By early January 1945, the full implications of the Ardennes armored clash were becoming clear. German command had suffered more than just material losses. The very doctrines they had relied upon since 1939 were being questioned. Memoirs from officers like Heinz Guderian later reflected a painful realization. The German emphasis on elite heavy tanks and isolated armored spearheads could not compete with the American emphasis on numbers, reliability, and logistical coordination. In the weeks following the Ardennes, captured German reports revealed widespread confusion and dismay among panzer divisions. Units that had prided themselves on tactical initiative now found themselves reacting defensively against an opponent who could replace losses faster than the Germans could inflict them. Sherman tanks, lighter and more maneuverable than the Panther or Tiger, had proven surprisingly resilient when used en masse. Field reports described scenarios where 2 or 3 Shermans working together could neutralize a Tiger, exploiting mobility and coordinated fire rather than brute force. The psychological impact on German crews was compounded by Allied air superiority. P-47, Thunderbolts, and P-51 Mustangs strafed retreating units, destroying supply trucks and isolated tanks. Crews reported that movement became a liability. Advancing Shermans could appear suddenly, and enemy air attacks made consolidation nearly impossible. Morale, already frayed by the unexpected losses, deteriorated further. By mid-January, several panzer regiments had been reduced to skeleton strength, unable to mount offensive operations without significant reinforcement. American forces, conversely, were emboldened by their success. The Sherman had proven its worth not as a heavy duelist, but as a reliable, coordinated weapon within a mechanized army. Commanders emphasized combined arms tactics. Infantry would fix positions, artillery would suppress key targets, and Shermans would exploit gaps to roll over enemy defenses. This approach became a template for subsequent operations, from crossing the Roer River to penetrating the Siegfried Line. Army engineers, having observed German fortifications overcome by coordinated tank advances, also refined bridging and supply strategies to sustain momentum. Casualty figures further illustrate the imbalance. While estimates vary, historians generally agree that German armored losses in the Ardennes exceeded 400 vehicles, including nearly 100 Panthers and 60 Tigers. American losses were around 130 Shermans, many repairable within days. Personnel casualties mirrored this pattern. German tank crews suffered hundreds of fatalities and captures, while U.S. armored units retained much of their operational strength. The battlefield, strewn with wrecks and scorched forests, became both a literal and symbolic representation of industrial scale, triumphing over technological prestige. Captured German assessments stressed surprise and disbelief. One report noted, "The enemy does not fear our heaviest tanks. Their machines, though lighter, come in overwhelming numbers, coordinated by observers and artillery, making every position untenable." Engineers who had designed heavy German armor were forced to confront a harsh reality. Their work, though mechanically superior, could be negated by mass production, mobility, and battlefield integration. These lessons resonated throughout the German high command, influencing armored doctrine for the final months of the war. Strategically, the Ardennes failure marked the irreversible decline of German offensive capabilities. On the Western Front, Hitler's gamble to sever Allied supply lines and seize Antwerp had collapsed. U.S. and British forces regained initiative, consolidating positions and preparing for the final push into Germany. The dominance of Shermans demonstrated that reliable, standardized, and numerically superior armor could decisively counter technically superior tanks, a lesson that would resonate in post-war armored doctrine worldwide. By the end of January 1945, the Ardennes frozen forests were quiet again, but the echoes of steel and gunfire had left an indelible mark. German units were demoralized, stretched thin, and reeling from both material and psychological shocks. Allied forces, confident in their combined arms methodology and industrial advantage, were positioned to advance into the German heartland, with momentum that could not be reversed. The Sherman tank, once criticized by European observers for its light armor, had proven its worth, not as a singular masterpiece, but as part of a system that could overwhelm even the most formidable enemy. The stage was now set for the climactic final operations in Western Europe, where the lessons of the Ardennes, coordination, numerical superiority, and battlefield adaptability would define victory. The Ardennes, with its frozen rivers and snow-laden forests, left more than wrecked tanks and broken morale. It left a lesson in the nature of war itself. Technology, while awe-inspiring, cannot compensate for limitations in numbers, logistics, and coordination. The German Panther and Tiger, mechanically brilliant but scarce and maintenance-heavy, fell victim to the relentless tide of Sherman tanks. Reliable, replaceable, and integrated into a system designed to sustain momentum under fire. From the perspective of history, this battle underscored a shift in armored warfare philosophy. The war had once glorified the idea of the singular supertank, the machine capable of outmatching any opponent. Yet the Ardennes revealed that industrial scale, mobility, and teamwork could outweigh individual mechanical superiority. The Shermans did not dominate through armor or firepower alone. They dominated through presence, adaptability, and the strategic use of numbers. American ingenuity lay not just in designing a tank, but in integrating it into a fully coordinated mechanized army. The human element, too, is impossible to ignore. German crews, trained for precision and tactical brilliance, faced exhaustion, fear, and the psychological strain of confronting an enemy who seemed inexhaustible. American tankers, in contrast, relied on training, discipline, and mutual trust, often outnumbered on individual engagements but victorious through coordination. The Ardennes was as much a test of morale and endurance as it was of metallurgy and ballistics. In broader terms, the Ardennes foreshadowed the post-war world of armored warfare. The emphasis on mass-produced, standardized, and logistically sustainable tanks became the foundation of Cold War doctrine. Lessons learned here influenced designs from the M48 Patton to Soviet T-55s, emphasizing reliability and battlefield integration over sheer size or firepower. Finally, the Ardennes is a testament to the complex interplay between human ingenuity and industrial capacity. It shows that in war, victory often comes not from the might of a single machine, but from the orchestration of countless moving parts, each reinforcing the other. The Sherman, unremarkable on paper, became a symbol of this principle, turning overwhelming numbers, strategic foresight, and disciplined execution into an unstoppable force. In the quiet that followed the Ardennes, the frozen forests whispered a truth that would echo for generations. In the theater of war, adaptation, coordination, and relentless resolve often outweigh raw power.